Good evening, everyone, and welcome to UJUG. I appreciate you taking your time to join us again. Just another update about going back in person. We're trying to find a venue for next month to come back in person. We'll keep you updated. And we're real excited to have everyone back in person. And we're going to do a hybrid event where it will be online and in person. So you'll be able to attend remotely or in person, and the presenter will answer questions from both. It's going to be this exciting thing that we haven't tried before. So before we get started with the main presentation, on the screen with me in the center, well, it's a center for me, I don't know if it's a center for everyone else, is Chris Maki, our presenter for this evening, and then Steve Franson from STG, who is the longest running sponsor for UJUG. And so we have Steve here. And my name is Don Bogardus on the UJUG board. And so Steve is here to talk about the local job market and what he's seeing with trends as far as skills and hiring. And if anyone has questions about this or anything else, you can put something in the chat, which is there's a say something nice dialogue in the lower right. And then for questions you want of the presenter, there's the ask a question dialogue that is more of the center right in Crowdcast. So Steve, tell us what you're seeing as far as skills, skill trends, like what is in demand, what's on the rise, what's on the decline. What are you seeing?
Well, Don, actually, it's a really good time to be a developer here in the local market in Utah. We're seeing a really strong market in a lot of skills. Specific to the UJUG, a lot of Java skills still are very strong. We are seeing a lot of, still a high demand for full stack developers, front end and back end. Also, kind of appropriate to tonight's topic is a lot of our clients are asking for AWS skills, and by that we mean mostly for developers to be conversant in development using the platform's tools and technologies. So the cloud native kinds of things. So serverless and microservices. In the Java space, we're still seeing strong Java or Spring and Spring Boot application development. Front end is really strong Angular and React that we're seeing, but we're also seeing a rise in demand for anything cloud. And so STG has started a cloud practice to kind of address those needs. So everything from cloud ops to DevOps to DevSecOps to cloud native development, solution architects, all those kinds of things. So it's a really exciting time to be a developer.
Great. So STG has a unique model where you hire developers and they have a consistent salary between gigs, right? And there's the idea of between contracts, you have them on the bench. Is that still the way that you do things?
Yeah, well, so we don't call it the bench anymore, but it's basically that thing. So the bench is you're in reserve and ready to go, as opposed to being your bench because you're not very good. But yes, all of our employees are W-2, and we do consulting and contracting, staff augmentation. We're really a full service shop, as well as development, but also project management, QA, UI, UX, across all the different languages and things within development. So anything custom software development.
Okay. And then let's see, what was my next? What are you seeing with work from home, with different companies? What are you seeing there?
Well, so reality is set in the last couple of years. The company has seen that, work from home or remote work is a viable thing. That people can be productive, and in a lot of cases, a lot more productive. So a lot more positions for fully remote are there. I mean, they've seen the writing on the wall. although we have seen some, locally that are going back to kind of a hybrid, so a couple of days in the office for meetings and those kinds of things, and then the rest of the time remote, just because they kind of understand that there is some synergy and, to use those terms, but just the collaboration and, face to face. And so some are adopting a hybrid kind of thing.
So the current percentage, how would you break it down between full remote, hybrid, and mostly in the office as far as right now?
Right now, it's really, I would say 75% or 75 to 85% remote.
Okay.
And then hybrid is starting to grow a little bit more. And so it would kind of split between full-time on site. Although, like I said, we shift projects every 6 months to 2 years, and it changes by different companies. But they, it's a lot of remote, and the salaries are good. They're competitive. Probably not as high as on the coasts and some of that, but yeah, still really good wages.
Great. Okay, we had a question from Lee about part-time demand. Is there, what do you know about that?
Yeah, we do as much as we can. Again, that's on client demand of what they want. So we do part-time, and we do 1099 as well as W-2 part-time kind of thing. And so it really depends on the project and the uniqueness of your skill set. If you bring something really, really unique to the table, there are a lot more that are willing to bring you on part-time.
Okay, gotcha. Great. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about you think the audience would want to know?
Child, just we're hiring, so
okay.
That's
like
my
I said
pitch,
before, okay. And like I said, so will you drop your email in the chat so people can reach you if they need to, and answer any more questions about STG services or just the recruiting market in general. So thanks so much, Steve, and appreciate your support all these 22 years for UJUG. You've been our longest running sponsor, and we really appreciate it.
Well, it's a great group, and so appreciate the time.
All right. You have a great evening.
All right. Thanks. You too.
All right. So I'm going to show some slides, and then we'll get right to it. So I got my share screen dialog here, and we'll talk about upcoming presentations. So everyone should see the UJUG logo right now. So let's go on to the current board for UJUG is myself, Jason Porter, and Jonathan Bronson. You can reach us at board@ujug.org. So we want to hear anything from compliments to complaints and suggestions. Would love to hear it. So that's the best way to reach us. And of course, these are our sponsors: STG, our longest running sponsor, our current diamond sponsor, Tech Systems and Goldman Sachs, JFrog, Lucid, Overstock, and Applitools round out our sponsors. So upcoming presentations. Next month, we've got Ian Robertson presenting on, we're going to do an interview with him. He was the former chief architect at Overstock and at Myriad, and he works at Amazon as a senior developer now. So he's got a vast amount of architecture experience that anyone who is on a path to software architecture, you're not going to want to miss this presentation. Would you agree with that, Chris?
I was just going to say, yeah, if you can get a chance to see Ian talk, you got to go. I've learned a lot from Ian, and he knows his stuff. So he'd be a great talk.
He did Ian did a talk a few years ago on API design, and that was he actually got I think he said it was his ticket to go to Java 1 every year because it was such an in-demand talk.
Well, he's in the audience right now. You can ask him.
Yes. So Ian's in the audience. Ian, give us a fun anecdote about your talk. We'd love to hear it. Okay, so after Ian, in April, we've got Leslie Brooks. who is just a prolific consultant on developer productivity. He's someone we had never had present before, and we've been kind of chasing him down for a while. He comes highly recommended, especially from Venkat, and we're excited to have him present in May. And so it'll be discussion about different productivity practices that he claims will give like a 50% improvement in team productivity, among other things. And he's a big advocate for BDD and how to do that correctly. So rounding out the rest of the summer, we've got some big names: Brian Sletton, Mark Richards, and Nate Shuda. And we're doing these free-form interviews with all of them. We found the best way to probe the minds of these industry leaders is to have just a broad interview to get a little piece of knowledge across their whole domain experience. So those are going to be great. Look forward to having everyone join for those. All right, so door prizes for tonight. Everyone's automatically entered. Don't need to do anything. We've got 2 JetBrains licenses we'll be giving away. 1 Agile Learner subscription. That is Venkat's online presentation, just smorgasbord. It's wonderful. And then this is from last month. Tech Systems was giving away some prizes. I'm not sure if they're going to be giving away this month. If they will, I'll just send them out. But they do gift certificates. Sometimes they're one of our diamond sponsors. All right, so the final slide here. Oh, this is the upcoming. I didn't change it from last. This is upcoming in 1 minute. So Chris, if you'd introduce yourself, and we'll turn the time over to you.
All right. Can I present my slides? Because my second slide is my intro.
Yes, I'll close that, and then I'll maximize you, and you can share your screen.
Okay, let's see. Are you seeing my UJUG screen?
Not yet.
I hit share screen. Let me try that again. Screen to share. Did that work? What am I doing wrong?
There's so much to see in your room. I'm just looking around there. So let's see. The way my share dialogue worked is it showed each of my 3 monitors, and I chose one of the monitors. So maybe if you maximize your slides on one of your monitors, then it will show up easier.
I bet you. I thought we fixed this. I bet you it's one of those Mac OS security permissions. Well, I'm going to share the screen I'm on for just a minute and see if that works.
Okay, we could get like the deep, windowing thing.
It's not working. Okay, tell you what. Give me a quick second here. Yeah, I'll do it this way. Sorry. My apologies, everyone. I actually did have my act together earlier. Don and I actually did this last week, but apparently Mac OS 10 is being very particular. So Don, I'm going to send you a link. There's a lot of slides that we're not talking about, but the very beginning is where you can start. And you'll see the ending. So let me just share this with you. Because I think that's going to be the easiest way. Yeah.
So did you email it to me?
Not quite yet.
Okay. Well,
I guess for everyone watching, here's a great example of what not to do if you're going to do a presentation. Okay.
And so just so everyone knows, Chris, you were the UJUG president for how many years? Was it 8 years?
Actually, I think it was 6 years. So the original founder of UJUG was Glenn Lewis, and he's what started UJUG, and STG was a key part of that. He also worked at STG. And then after him, my mind blanked on who took over. But Glenn came back and then was looking for a person to take over. And I started in, I guess, the January of 2007 is when I took over. And then I stepped down in 2013. And you've been here the whole time.
And you grew the group from probably what was the attendance when you started versus when you ended?
Yeah, I think it kind of varied. In the beginning, maybe it would be 50 people, maybe it'd be 60, 70. So, I mean, it was a very popular group. But I think by the time I wrapped up and you were part of it and Jason and everyone, we were probably up to like 150 people.
Wow.
Or at least 100 people every meeting, and some meetings would be more. So,
yes.
Okay, well, this is going to be interesting because I have my presenter notes, and I'm just going to bring those up, and yeah, we'll see how this goes. All right, let's try it out. There's some animations, some fun, cooking, all sorts of other stuff in here. I'm just kidding on the cooking. So hi, everyone. My name is Eks Ssp, and let's take the next 20 to 40 minutes and dive into a little bit about what developer platforms are. Do you want to go to the next slide, Don? Okay, so when I sent Don a picture, because he had an older picture of me on the site, I thought I'd send this new picture that was me closer to my face and everything. But then it turned out it was a giant head, a disembodied head floating on top of an elevator here, or escalator here. So can you go to the next slide? So this is the actual picture that I sent him, which is me at an airport, the Portland airport. But then I realized my last presentation in 2019, next slide, is this slide, which is also at the Portland airport. So apparently I spend a lot of time at the airport. And by the way, this would go better if we were all in person, people laughing and making comments. But the interesting thing about this is the first picture of me at the airport was taken pretty close to the very last time I did a public talk, which was for No Fluff, Just Stuff in March 8th, 2020. And of course, no sooner did I land back here in Portland when that trip was over and the whole world shut down. So it turns out that it's been 2 years and a little over a week since I last was speaking publicly. So if I make any flops or anything here, forgive me. All right, so just a little bit about me. As we talked about, I used to be part of the UJUG with Don and Jason. But about 2017, I stepped away from working for companies. So companies like Overstock.com or Open English or others, and decided to start my own company. And so at that time, the company was called Rip City Software. We did lots of cool projects for a lot of big clients. But then in 2021, I really wanted to start a new company and build a software product and really do the whole startup process of fundraising and forming a corporation and doing all those things. So that's what I've been doing for about the last year and 3 months or so. And back in 2021, I formed Cloudly Inc. And I think we will be talking a little bit about that later. Okay, so that's enough of the stories about me. Why don't we get started? Next slide, please. All right, I wanted to start off with a picture. I actually wanted to paint a brief picture of what we're about to discuss and give you a little bit of background on what my thinking is when I present some of these topics, which may line up a lot with your perspectives, or there may be some new things or some different things. So if I talk about things that you have a very different perspective on, I'd love to hear your comments or questions. But where I'd like to start is real briefly looking at the way we used to build code when we would have on-site, and many of us probably still have on-site data centers. It was very much compute-based. It would be something that you create and maybe the ops team takes it and deploys it. Now, obviously, since the mid-2000s when AWS first started, things have changed dramatically. And I would say in the last 5 to 7 years, things have sped up much, much faster. And when we look at what are your options to building software, deploying software, hosting environments, the number of options has become quite staggering. And depending on the size of your company, maybe if you're a startup, the decisions are in your lap. Maybe you're a small company of maybe just 20, 30 developers, and still you have to be, or your teammates are the ones making these decisions. And if you start now, those decisions are a little less clear than they might have been before, where again, you just created a compute instance. If you take a look at AWS, they have about 200 different services that they offer. Some of them are, very market specific, like IoT or machine learning, but a lot of them are also just generally things that you might find useful for your application. Now that's just AWS. What about Azure or GCP or DigitalOcean or all the other environments, right? So when you sit down and look at, well, what's the best way to build, deploy, manage, and support my customers and my product, you have a lot of choices. And the choices are becoming complex enough that all the things we were trying to simplify by going to the cloud have become equally complex. So it's with that background that we're going to take a quick look at developer platforms. I will also make a little note on some of the terminology I'm going to use. Apparently, I've had a Steve Jobs moment because he used to refer to everything as apps. In the early days, he'd call it shrink wrap apps. And then later, he just called them apps, right? iOS apps, App Store, all that stuff. Well, in this presentation, I'm going to use the word cloud apps a lot. And the reason for that is you can substitute the word app for whatever you'd like. Maybe it's a microservice, maybe it's a service, maybe it's a function, maybe it is a instance of Stripe where you're collecting payments and that integrates to your service. So just think of app as sort of a general idea of something that's executing that you manage or need to control. And then one last note, and then we'll get into the good stuff, is I tried to put together sort of some general concepts about a developer platform. And what you're about to look at is a bunch of different developer platforms, and they all have different things that they emphasize. So it's not sort of like a one size fits all. It's not even really like Kubernetes in the sense that there's lots of different defined APIs, and you can stick in your DNS resolution, or you can do your IDP, all those other pieces. So with all that, I'm going to try to paint a picture of what a developer platform will be, talk about those features, and then we'll jump in. Okay, let's move on. Next slide. All right, so what is a developer platform? So this is sort of a bullet by bullet sort of thing, Don. So if you just want to click on that. So the general concept of a developer platform is to bring together all the little bits of your workflows and tool chains, whether that's you specifically on your laptop or on your workstation, and you're building, compiling security scans, your deployments, your environments, like a dev environment or a stage environment. All of those things can be part or be managed or can help you manage through a developer platform. So next bullet. So here we're just going to point out a couple of different things, right? So a developer platform could kickstart your code base for your new project. It could create a dev, test, prod, QA, stage, whatever names you have environments. It could take an approach like with some of the cloud providers where they have multi-organizational units like AWS does, and your dev team gets an organizational unit that's completely isolated for itself. And then as you work on your code, it moves then into maybe a more shared environment. It will most likely deal with CI/CD pipelines, sometimes creating them, sometimes using the ones you already have. It's definitely going to include security at various levels. HashiCorp has a tool called Sentinel, which is looking at your Terraform infrastructure as code and looking for vulnerabilities through like a static code analysis type approach. And so any kind of security checks, container scanning, all that, those are going to be part of this. And then finally, taking whatever it is you're deploying, whether it's back one more. Whether it is a container, it's a function like a zip file for a Lambda, or it's a full-on app that's just going to be dropped into an EC2 instance, whatever that is, the developer platform is going to help you with these last few last mile sort of pieces. Now, the one thing I will say that they all have in common is this last set of deployments, making sure that the infrastructure is provisioned and ready for you, for whatever your services needs are, and then deploying that into the environment. And again, as you know, different environments have different needs. Kubernetes is defined one way. Serverless, your choices are a little bit different. But nonetheless, your developer platform is going to help you with that. Okay, and then the last one, Don. So as I was saying, that developer platforms come in a lot of shapes and sizes and provide different focuses of service. But as I said, they all have one thing in common, which is deploying your application. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now, this is going to be a series in it. Can you hit it one more time? I'm going to try to, on my side, be able to read these. So what this slide is going to do is just try to give you a bit of a sense of what's happening on the web, different publications and different thought leaders and things. So there's an excellent book. I was just looking to see if I had the physical copy here. A great book that I think everyone should read is Ask Your Developer by Jeff Lawson. He is the founder and CEO of Twilio. and one of the early programmers. He's got great stories. But the very last chapter on infrastructure is all about a developer platform. And so here you can see and I'll just read this part. Platforms are a force multiplier. It's like a fulcrum. Every dollar I put in, I can return $5. So meaning that there is an investment in a developer platform, but once that platform reaches critical mass, every dollar you put in is going to give you an exponential return on the kind of productivity you have. All right, next one. So this is Tech Radar. As you know, Tech Radar is ThoughtWorks publication that comes out a couple times a year, kind of like the Gartner Magic Quadrants and kind of thing. And so last year they were just talking about how a developer platform is something that you should actually be seriously looking at in 2021. All right, the next one is Gartner, and it's just talking about how many different companies, what percentage of enterprises are considering or looking at or evaluating. Here they use the term internal developer platform. That's kind of a, a interchangeable term, if you will. And then the next one is going to be Forbes magazine. And again, here you can see Forbes, and you can actually just go to the last, there's two more, Don. There are, Forbes, the DevOps report in 2020 and InfoWorld, all of these publications and books and things are talking about you should really look at a developer platform. All right, so let's move the next slide. And this is going to be, again, a per bullet, so you can just get that first bullet out. So what are the characteristics of a developer platform? Well, the first thing is that they're going to enable or empower your team to build and manage your own software. And I'll probably mention this a few more times down the road, but Werner Vogel's CTO of AWS and Amazon, I guess, he talks about you build it, you run it. And there's that new sort of Netflix kind of pioneered some of this, but sort of the current state of the art development and deployment is that each team is responsible for the beginning, for the ideation through, retirement of a service or an app. And so a developer platform becomes a key part of that to enable you to quickly do those kind of things. All right, next one. So what we're going to see here is how do platforms do this? They're going to enable you to move quickly, meaning there's a lot of, again, I'll use another AWS term, undifferentiated heavy lifting. That means if I'm doing something that every other company is doing, then whatever I'm doing is not really a strategic advantage. And since everybody's got to do it, it's not really adding any value for the amount of time I spend on that. My time could be better spent, say, building some business logic for our customers. So what a developer platform is going to do is sort of systematize some of those basic things that you might do. And we've all messed around with a Jenkins file or a GitLab CI file or a Circle CI config. And you always say to yourself when you've done a few of these are all the same, or they're all pretty close to the same, right? So a lot of those things are going to be covered by or enabled by the developer platform, so you don't have to spend a lot of time on it. All right, next one. This is a big one, self-service. I think the general trend at this point is for ops teams, DevOps teams, to really be managing and monitoring the underlying infrastructure, whether that's an EKS cluster or clusters or your GKE clusters, but really defining what different kinds of environments, or like a serverless on Kubernetes, or a serverless function within AWS, like a Lambda, but creating the framework to do those. And then the dev team decides, for my project, its requirements best fit is a Fargate container in AWS. And so you don't need to get approvals. You don't need to, have other people help you get there. The developer platform does that. And another quote from Jeff Lawson is, the goal is to provide developers with a menu and let them pick and choose what they want, whenever they want, without going through gatekeepers. And so that's another big part of what a developer platform would do. The next one, next bullet, please, is ensuring that there are some guardrails, and the guardrails that people are providing vary. I mentioned Sentinel from Terraform. That's a great way of ensuring that you aren't basically making mistakes that can be easily caught through static analysis. My favorite is, the open S3 bucket, right? So Sentinel is going to find that, right? And so some kind of guardrails are going to be included in your developer platform. It could also be scanning, static code analysis, there's a lot of things, but there's going to be some kind of guardrails. And another example of that would be your dev team, or your ops team, creating the deployment template, if you will, and they've vetted that. And so it has those guardrails, right? Because they built it and you just use it. They've already made those, critical decisions. And then finally, the last bullet here, Don, is bringing the power of cloud computing to all developers. So one of the goals, at least in my mind, of a developer platform is to take a junior engineer, a 10X engineer, and everybody in between, and allow each of those people to take their skills and unique talents to build solutions for their company and deploy them into the cloud without having to have all that experience. And for the people with all that experience, they can further tune and tweak and make sure that they're getting all the last, bits of performance out of their environment. But compare that to, before, where you'd have to get lots of approvals and line up all these different things to get your binary that's going to run on a compute instance deployed. It's a huge change, right? Night and day. And so you can really then mix up a lot of sort of skill sets within your team so that you can bring fresh ideas to your company. But that's just my personal rant on why you want a mix of types of people, skill sets, and roles and all that. Okay, but so those are sort of the characteristics of a developer platform. All right, yes, leaner. Next one is we're going to sort of dig through each of these. So the first one we talked about was empowering your teams. So what does that really look like? What do I mean when I say empowering a team? So it's going to provide a path to build an app easily. Now, some developer platforms help you kickstart the app. Some developer platforms are going to take the app you've already built and deploy it. But either way, both situations, the goal is to help you create that app or get that app into an environment with the concept of always be deploying to production, right? Always be getting that in front of your customers. So they're going to help smooth that path out. They're going to simplify the complexity of cloud native apps. Now, if the N, I think, was touching the D, we'd be talking about Kubernetes. I separated them to talk about all cloud environments, not just Kubernetes. But when you look at those 200 plus options, right? Do I need to use Quantum Ledger because I want a ledger database, basically a pseudo blockchain without all the consensus stuff? Or do I want to do a serverless function? Do I want to build, I want to deploy containers, but I don't want all the complexities of Kubernetes? Or I want Kubernetes, right? All of those are choices. A developer platform is going to enable you to pick from a series of environments or things that they provide, and then you can put your code into that environment. So again, you're focusing back on the code. Typically, you're going to provide some sensible defaults. Now, again, most of these systems can be heavily customized by your ops teams, your security teams, so SecOps, DevOps. Yes, I see OpenShift down there. Sorry, I thought someone was going to say shift left, but allows you to really set up what that environment is going to be like. But if you don't know any of that, you're doing a startup and you want to get your app out there, they're going to start with some sensible defaults to help you make some good choices up front, kind of like the guardrail idea. And then they may introduce new execution models. I'll talk about this maybe later about the lift and shift, which we've normally thought of as taking on-prem services and putting them in the cloud. But I've also seen that where people take old non-cloud-based kind of applications and try to shoo them into the cloud. But you may be used to a certain sort of process for how you build and deploy your apps. Well, a developer platform can open up a ton of new ideas. For example, let's say you wanted to collect payments and you're, again, a smaller company and you don't have a team dedicated to that. Well, maybe you want to use Stripe, but maybe you don't like or don't understand a lot of Stripe. Well, perhaps a module in your developer platform has a Stripe integration built where it just shows, helps you connect your systems, and now your app can use Stripe to collect payments. But again, those things have always been there, but you need a lot of knowledge. And so a developer platform tries to help guide you along with that so that you can get started and then become more knowledgeable of your environments. And of course, the Werner Vogel's comment from earlier, you build it, you run it, right? So this is going to empower your team to do that. All right, next slide, please. So moving quickly, I think having been in the startup world for the last year and a bit, and also running my own companies, the idea of getting out in front of your customers fast is really important. So for me personally, moving quickly is a key component of my company. And I'm sure at some level it's a component of all of your companies, but sometimes the motive to move quickly and your ability to move quickly sort of don't align properly. So in many of the developer platforms that we will look at, many of them provide templates. They provide templates to sort of just get you started. So Backstage, for example, has some loose templates for certain parts of your process and more detailed templates for other pieces. But our product, Cloudly, provides templates that let you just fill out a couple things, and it creates an application that fits. I'll talk about Backstage in a sec. Gives you all sorts of defaults that set security at a very high level while being performant. But that's a template, right? So most platforms are going to give you a template. Again, as I said, the next bullet, sophistication is going to kind of vary. And the platform's general idea is to help you focus on business problems and not focus as much on the infrastructure around you. And Don and I were talking about some questions after this presentation. And so if we get to some of those, I'll talk a little bit about where at least I think things are going and how this model of you write code and the execution environment is going to become more and more opaque, and just maybe have some key components, like whether it's scalable, what kind of load it might fit, and you don't really worry about the rest. I think that's kind of going to be the future, and I think developer platforms help you get there. And of course, the last item is a lot of this boilerplate that may be unique the first time you create a project and then is just kind of repeated. They can sort of scoop that up and make it so you aren't repeating yourself all the time, but you're getting that consistency. All right, next slide. Maybe I'll move a little faster here on some of these. So self-service infrastructure, this is going to be another key component. Now, when I say self-service infrastructure, I don't mean infrastructure that doesn't have DevOps, DevSecOps, or what have you, doesn't have those teams involved, but it means that instead of a team managing a service ticket that says, hey, I need this infrastructure, they can instead configure, define sort of what those environments might look like. Like, here's what an EC2 instance looks like. Here's what a database would look like if you wanted, say, a SQL database, or here's some parameters for like a NoSQL database. And all of that enables your company to set those things up. If you're a really small company, some of these platforms actually might give you some starting templates. And the idea then is that it can be a real self-service environment. The dev team's like, I need this application. I know it's going to be doing these kind of interactions, and here I can go and create my service, deploy it, create dev, QA stage, etc., without needing anybody else. And again, they're building those in the way that you like. And then the next one is, so maybe we can come back to the restrictive lock-in. I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement, but how platforms enable this is going to vary. Restrictive lock-in. So there, I do have a comment on that, I think, coming up. If I don't at the end, bring that back. But yeah, there are some answers to that. But again, I'll just here mention that the goal, in a developer platform, as Jeff Lawson said, is to provide them a menu and let them pick and choose what they want when they want, without having a gatekeeper. And so maybe I'll just answer that question real quick. So the idea would be that you can go down an easy path where we've tried to pick as many common cloud native services that we want. And those are all there for you to have a smooth path to go from ideation to production and customer. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a different path. And part of your path of creating a different execution model would then feed back into creating some of these templates, working with the ops team. And now your new idea, your approach becomes yet another part of this catalog of what people can do. All right, next slide, please. Excuse me. So I sort of touched on this earlier about Guardrails, and I mentioned HashiCorp Sentinel. There's OPA, the Open Policy Agent. There's a bunch of these different kinds of tools out there. And of course, you have things like black duck scans, which are going to look for license compatibility issues. But the idea here with the Guardrail is to provide a place in your process of writing code and getting it to your customers that deals with these things. And in most developer platforms, they have sort of stages things will go through. There's a part where you, as a developer, are maybe writing, your unit tests and how you compile your application. And then from there, it's going to start moving through your CI/CD pipeline, again, maybe created and managed by the platform. And at that point, it can start injecting different kinds of security and other kinds of analysis. And it's through that you can do things like a black duck scan. Now, I know A lot of you might already be using Nexus, and Nexus kind of does some of those things. I think Artifactory does some of those things, but there are a lot of other environments that don't necessarily have those hooks into them. And so as a platform, you can start to configure those kind of steps to make sure that you're covering your company's risk and exposure and empowering your dev teams to do what they would like to do and meet those customer needs. Again, every platform is going to handle this a different way, but the platform, the developer platform, really kind of creates a unified way that you're going to move through this process. And that is where the guardrails come in so that you can have more freedom. All right, next slide. Enables developers. So here, by having these templates and guardrails, the skill of the developer, can vary. And by that, I mean, they still know how to write good code, but they don't have to know everything about each target environment, right? They don't have to be an AWS expert. So like we just heard earlier, we want people with AWS expertise. And what if you're a new developer and you don't have that expertise, but you know how to write code better than, peers of 5 to 7 years experience? Why can't you come in and bring that expertise? And so that's kind of what a developer platform is going to do, right? Is to help enable you to shine with your skills. Now, if you're that really, really good engineer who knows all this stuff, that's great. You can help set up the templates. You can help expand this platform to help your company or who you work for to be able to move even faster and create a competitive advantage. So at every level, I think a developer platform is going to enable you, but not needing to be a cloud expert all the time. Okay, so let's, next slide. So we're gonna just change scope here a little bit and talk about some developer platforms. If I was in person, I would say, hey, what do you guys think? What are your questions? But I think we, obviously, if you want to throw a question in, feel free to do that. I'm watching the little side piece here. I feel like I'm on Twitch, but the slides, this isn't flying off at 1,000 questions a second. Okay, so let's go into developer platforms. What we're going to do here is we're going to just take a look at a couple of platforms that exist. I'll tell you a little bit about them, what they do, and you have some links where you can go check them out. So the first one we're going to start off with is probably the most well-known. By the way, if you know of none of these, that probably would make sense, because this is still a pretty new and niche sort of market. And so if you're not actively looking for things, you may not have stumbled across it. But Backstage is from Spotify. And we know how everybody loves the Spotify model with the squads and all those different organizational structures. And what they have done is tried to codify some of that and some of their internal practices in the open source platform Backstage. They also offer a SaaS version that is a paid product called Roadie. But here I'm just taking from the website, right? It's an open platform that basically allows you to create your own developer platform. One of the good things about Backstage is you actually have to host it. So there are usually some security issues, perhaps with a SaaS platform. And in the case of Backstage, you can just deploy it into your cloud. And so you don't really have to worry about any external access, which can be really good for a really big company. If you're a startup or somewhere in the middle, you may not want to have to handle everything, because that kind of goes back to you need to be an expert. But it does provide you those building blocks. And I would say that the key for Backstage is while it can do many things, it's really about codifying your teams, your APIs, your projects, providing an ownership model. So I'd be like, hey, I need to use a service to do XYZ. You can search for that. You can find the service, and then you can find the team that manages and builds that service. And so the service catalog is what it's called in Backstage, is a huge component to help you sort of navigate your organization. And, especially today when everybody's remote, as we were just talking about, it's much harder to walk across the hall and say, hey, what are you doing in your app? Now you can use the catalog to find out what people are doing. There's lots of plugins. I was going to take you on a couple of links here to like their website and stuff, but I think we'll just leave it here with what Backstage does. Actually, Don, if you have, oh yeah, you're just doing the main screen, so we'll just leave it like that. Okay, next one. So the next developer platform we're going to look at is the Amazon Eks Ssp. it's a long-winded name. And you can see in the quote that it's a shared services platform. But basically what this is Amazon's attempt to create an internal developer platform that is going to be based on EKS, that's the Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service. And it gives you some examples and kind of gives you a kickstart to how you can build a developer platform on EKS. Now, I haven't used this kickstart. I've used many other AWS kickstarts. And so if you're familiar with those and how they work and both the pluses and some of the things that might be missing, I'm pretty sure that all applies here. But the good thing is you can go click on that. And even if you were like, I don't think I'm interested in rolling everything on my own like this, maybe Backstage is better. I think reading through the docs and understanding Amazon's position on this can be a real educational process. They talk a lot about well-architected tools and a lot of other things that the SSP is trying to bring to you as a user of the platform. So something I think is worth checking out. And so that's our second developer platform. All right, let's go to the next one. So the next one is from a company called Humanitech. They are out of, I believe, Germany. And I would say one of the big things that Humanitech is, one of the big things about Humanitech is they've been the champion, if you will, of the word internal developer platform. There is a website, internaldeveloperplatform.org, that is from Humanitech. And I point that out because unlike trunk-based development and trunkbaseddevelopment.org, where that website is really just the generic, what is trunk-based development? Here, Humanitech's definitions are really focused on sort of how Humanitech views an internal developer platform. And there's nothing wrong with that, just it's good to know what the perspective is when you're reading it. But here you can just see that they're trying to do a lot of these heavy lifting things like orchestration configuration. I've actually talked with these guys and been to some of their webinars. And one thing I asked them was, what do you do up to that last mile? Meaning, do you help me build my application, my development environment, my tooling? Do you provide templates? And they don't do any of that. They are just looking at the end, taking your app and getting it into an environment. But of all of these platforms we're looking at, I think they have a really good story on building out a self-service Kubernetes infrastructure. So definitely worth looking at. They're one of the early pioneers in the space. I think actually they started about the same time we started building our product. Just they got their message out while we were hunkered down writing code. But good company to look at. Okay, next slide. So the next company we have is Shipa. And Shipa is kind of an interesting twist. They don't necessarily call themselves a developer platform, but they provide a lot of the same kind of services. And their specific bend is on the idea of an app ops model. Now, you may be used to, DevOps, Sec DevOps. In the case of Shipa, what they want to do is define your application, how it's going to be deployed, and allow the ops team to change everything out at the bottom. And so they basically say on their website, they enable DevOps teams the freedom to move from VMware to Kubernetes, or switch from EC2 to GKE, or go from Terraform to GitOps, or Pulumi. And so they're trying to take your app and make its definition independent of all these things. And then Shipa can provide you the mechanism to deploy, manage, and all those things in the background. So you as a developer, like all these other places, allow you to focus, or these other apps, allow you to focus on what you do best, which is building apps to solve customer problems. Okay, one more slide. And this is going to be our last platform to look at. Now, this is Zeet. They, in January, got a $2 million round of funding. It's kind of interesting. I never used to care about this stuff, but running my own company, like who's getting funding, what's happening in the industry. And so they've been kind of ramping up some of their documentation and their examples and their website. And I will be honest, I'm a little, I don't quite grok what Zeet is doing. And one of the problems I had even with our product is talking about, like, how do you pitch or explain what your developer platform is? And for each of these companies, I've gone to their websites, I've gone to their YouTube channels to try to understand, what it is they're bringing. And of all of them, Zeet is the one that kind of confuses me the most. But I think it would be safe to say that Zeet's play is on Web 3.0. So they're doing a lot of machine learning. So spin up a machine learning infrastructure very quickly. They're doing AI, how do you build that quickly? They're doing blockchain, IPFS, the interplanetary file system, and a lot of WebAssembly. And they also like to take services. I keep using Stripe because that's the one that comes to mind most quickly, but other services as well, and assemble those together into your application. And that's kind of been the focus of Z. So if you're interested in Web 3.0 and other things, you could go check them out. Yes, lots of acronyms. That's why I mentioned IPFS, the interplanetary file system. But if there's any others I've mentioned, feel free to drop them here. Okay, so one more slide. All right. So where do we go from here? So I wanted to start off with this comment. This isn't a direct quote. He worded it sort of like this, so I just kind of added some words to make it fit here. But he basically said that a developer platform, especially now, can be a real source of competitive advantage. So especially, if you're a company that's being very scrappy and wanting to gain that market share and attract those customers, a developer platform can be the difference between you succeeding and failing. Because of that leverage of how fast can you build an application. We estimated with our product, we could remove, so if you took every project you've worked on and talked about setting up your developer tool suite, your build, your Jenkins or GitLab files and stuff, if you were to put all that together and collect every amount of time, you're probably going to spend somewhere between 3 and 10 days cumulatively on your application. But a developer platform can do that in 5 minutes or less. So if you think about that, you can have an idea or a new business problem you're going after and be working on the code today, as opposed to in a couple weeks. And you know that what you're getting is a vetted environment. So that's what I want to talk about, that competitive advantage. So I think, reviewing your company and the teams, you understand your own environments best and what your current development practices or processes are. And based on just some of the things we talked about today, you can kind of reflect on that, what benefits a developer platform has, and it may or may not be of value to you. For example, if your company is really in maintenance mode, not building new things, got existing deployments, you probably won't get a lot out of the developer platform. If you're a startup, you would get a lot out of the developer platform. And if you're in between, there's going to be a lot of advantages for you. The other part here is, do you want to be an early adopter? If you remember in the book, Crossing the Chasm, there's that bell curve shape. And there are different stages where people and companies feel comfortable. And this is clearly the early adopters phase, right? And this is a spot where if you don't have the appetite for things to change dramatically, for things to come and go, for standards to be introduced and change stuff, if you don't have an appetite for that, this might not be the right spot today. But I think it's definitely worth looking at and seeing how you can improve what you're doing so that you're actually being focused on productive work every day. And then the last question, which I think is important for everything, is I guess I should be done. Do you want to put in the work to make this successful? Does your company have the buy-in? Do you want to actually spend the time as the champion of this idea? All right, and you can go to the next slide. So that's my overview of a developer platform, and I'll turn it back to Don.
All right, thanks, Chris. So let's do the interview part of the session here. Let me close my screen share.
Thanks for the great job comment. Appreciate it.
Okay. I've got to figure out again how to split the screen.
I'm glad it's not just me. I'm sure there's some. Before we shared screens, or I shared my screen last time we talked about this. But.
Yeah, I think when my video's off, it doesn't share the screen. So I want to make sure I have a good mental working model for the place that this, the developer platform is in my toolbox. Let me know if I'm grokking it correctly. Like, it provides an abstraction layer to set up your infrastructure for like a startup. If you're trying to build an architecture from scratch, am I close?
Well, I think so. You and perhaps I misspoke in talking about this, but it's not just your architecture. It's bringing most of us typically have a few ways we've built and deployed applications, and that's our mental model. And because of that, we may not be taking advantage of what a cloud platform has to offer. There's a lot of especially again, there's a lot of very inexpensive, extremely high volume throughput and quotas where you pay nothing. That might be the best way to deploy your solution, but you don't know that technology. You don't understand the details. So depending on the developer platform, they may provide templates that make that an environment where all you have to know is, here's my execution model. So I got to be a little bit aware of that. And then I can write my solution. And now I can take it and I can put it into that. I could then say, I'm going to go traditional. I'm just going to put it in a compute instance. You can still do that, right? But a developer platform is going to envelop all areas of could envelop all areas of your development. Imagine the perfect scenario where you use a Docker developer environment, which is basically your tool chain that you'd use on your laptop or workstation. It's that whole tool chain to build your app. It's included, obviously, in a text file. It's going to include all of your application code, all of your infrastructure code that you wrote, and together, the platform also does all your deployments for you. So all of a sudden now you've got a complete end-to-end solution that uses the tools you want, but you don't need to understand how to put all that together, right? Because each one of those is probably a full-time job for many months to understand how to make the developer environment work, to make the GitLab environment work, or GitHub. And so the developer platform can help ease the adoption curve on that. So I don't know if it necessarily drives your architecture. I think it just gives you more options, puts more options on the table for you.
So is it fair to say it would help you discover like AWS services that you might not know exist, and with those templates, right?
Yeah. So imagine maybe you had a little wizard or interview type process where you said, I want a database. Right. And I actually presented a slide on this at my last presentation when we were talking about Microsoft architecture patterns, where they had a NoSQL database, they had a time series database, and they had a relational database. And each database was for a very specific workload. Right. When I wanted instantaneous responses, I'm going to go to a NoSQL database because it's designed for 7-millisecond responses. When I need to do reporting, I need a SQL database. And so imagine as you're trying to build your app, you could even interact with some questions and I kind of need this data to be immutable over time, right? You might think of that as blockchain. A ledger database is kind of the same thing, right? It's write only, and your record is persistent and it doesn't change. You just have to keep adding new records. Based on those things, you might not have any idea how to use Quantum Ledger, which is an AWS service. But you want a ledger database. Well, it could start that. It could give you some starter code so that in your application, you see how you would create an object, if you will, and put it in the database. And so you've got your connections, example code, everything sort of ready to go. And you can start from a place of success where your data is being written to a database. And now you can kind of play with it a little bit, right? And so just, new opportunities that weren't there for you before, without that need again to spend months trying to grok how to configure it, what it does, and how it's set up.
Okay. So like with any abstraction layer like this, you're going to lose some kind of power user options. Like how would you mitigate some of that here?
Well, at least, excuse me, for our product, we believe everything is code. And as a result of everything being code, whether it's infrastructure definitions, it's a lot of other parts of your application, the expert has all the source code at their disposal, so they can do whatever they want.
Okay.
All the nuances of every GCP service and all of its tweaks, and you're using Pulumi. Great, you can go into the Pulumi configuration and change it all you want. I know nothing about that service. I'm just going to use what the platform gave me. We're both on a path to being able to deploy our application. Okay.
And so when you're talking about our solution, you're talking about the Cloudily solution, which is the company you founded, right?
Yeah.
So what was the kind of opening in the industry that you felt wasn't being served that, you felt like, you wanted to address?
I felt like it always took too long to start a project. And I spent a lot of time fiddling with CI/CD pipelines, excuse me, and my deployment environment. And in my opinion, that was completely wasted time because none of that time was helping me move forward with our clients. And so because of that, I wanted something that would eliminate all of that for me. And when we started with our product is kind of when Humanitech started. Backstage started like 6 months after we did, or maybe about, I mean, if you go look in their Git commit history, it's about around the same time we started. So I think a lot of us were seeing that a diverse team, both in terms, especially in the skills side, makes a better product and a better team. And how do you leverage all of those different capabilities? Well, getting rid of all of these time-consuming, not really appropriate, not really that don't move you forward kind of skills in your product. Why don't we put those into code and put those into a platform? So the one thing I will say, infrastructure code as code is what we all love. It's what our product is built on. It's what most of these products are built on. But every project that I have looked at that has tried to move to infrastructure as code has pretty much always failed. And it's this death by a million cuts. You go to do it, okay, it works. Oh, it didn't quite work, do it again. And of course, in DevOps, your turnaround time is sometimes hours, maybe even like a day, right? Depending on what you're creating and you're tearing down. And so infrastructure as code or everything as code is great, but you kind of need a little kickstart so that you're starting off with something that's working and then tweak as you need it. And, when you look at, like, for example, when we set up an EKS cluster for one of our clients, we had 85 AWS services.
Wow.
Right? It's a lot of stuff. And a lot of it's just sort of general stuff that comes with EKS, but you still have to know enough about each of those, right, to set them up. So, yes, as Pete said, lots of back-end magic is in his comment in the thread here.
So for all the companies that didn't start with a developer platform, is it, a good idea or at all plausible to kind of add it later, or is it by far preferable to start with it? I mean, is it going to be like shoehorning it? Can you address that? Yeah,
so almost every platform we looked at, I think everyone, has some initial sort of kickstarting stuff, but they all allow you to import your existing projects.
Okay.
And so you can bring in your projects, and a lot of them will detect if you're using Circle CI, GitHub, Jenkins, and then we'll also help you connect the platform to your Jenkins or whatever environment. And then that will all become part of the developer platform. So the next team that either imports or starts a project already has all the Jenkins stuff integrated. They just need to create their own Jenkins file.
Okay.
And again, a template might give you a way to do that already. That's just sort of boilerplate. And if you think about it, if you ask yourself, is my Jenkins file my competitive advantage or my ability to meet my job's objectives? The answer is most likely going to be no, right? Your job is really building that developer, that value for your customer. Or if it's an ops, it's to make sure everything's running and nothing is going down and we're meeting service level objectives. So all of those little nuanced pieces aren't really moving your product forward. Gotcha. And you can get lost in them for weeks, right? I think we've all done that.
All right, so we have our first question through the Ask a Question dialogue. I would encourage everyone to use that to submit their questions, and then we can, we can click our button so in recordings, people can see when they're answered. So Ian is asking, how have you found developer platforms do with leaky abstractions, i.e., do they do a good job of hiding low-level details you don't need, but still giving you access to the lower-level details when it turns out they matter for your use case?
Yes, that's a fabulous question. And at least the approach we're taking, and again, I think most of us took the same approach, where we try to leverage infrastructure as code. And so if you took that approach, the code is there as part of your project. At least in our case, we put them all together because if you're going to build it and run it and support it, you need to be aware of actually what you're doing. However, if you use pre-built templates, they're already going to set up environments for you. So that will give you the definitions but you don't need to go into those definitions for everything to work. That was where I was talking about the sort of the difference between the entry-level developer and the senior person who just knows how to do Terraform in their sleep or Pulumi or something, right? For those people, they can go in and get those details. The one thing our platform did that was a little bit different than others is we would actually build that initial like entity code. So we might give you an example, like a person, and we would set up a lot of the security constraints around your connection to the database, how to map that to a specific, say, a table in DynamoDB or Postgres. And the idea being that we wanted you to start off with a secure, well-architected solution, and then you could adjust it to your domain model, right? So if you have one example and you have a unit test and an integration test and all that's in your kickstarted project, then you can start changing and tweaking things, and you're coming from a point of success, as opposed to being, I can't get this to work. I don't know what I'm doing. And then from the leaky abstractions part, you could dig into that infrastructure as code if you had to, right? So if you really needed to change things, you could dig into that. So Ian, let me know if that answered your question. If not, feel free to ping me or text me, whichever you'd like.
Great. And so we have a question, just it's security. So I'm not sure what is meant here. Does that mean anything to you, Chris?
Well, I think we talked about guardrails was one of the topics of what a developer platform can give you. So I'm going to go on a tangent of security, and you can let me know if I'm answering the question. I think security is a major part of every developer platform. I think one of the goals of developer platforms is to plug all of these pluggable holes that we create. And again, I use the simple example of a S3 bucket being exposed, right? But there are other things like vulnerabilities in your containers, and maybe issues, static code analysis of your binaries and stuff, or your source code. All of those things can be part of that platform. And so that first part is going to take care of what kind of vulnerabilities are in your app and the infrastructure you're going to create. And then depending on the platform, they will use other techniques, whether it's on-prem or like in your cloud deployed, like Backstage, or it's a SaaS platform like Roadie. They will make sure that the right kinds of permissions are given to enable you to deploy your app to a production environment. So in the case of Cloud Manager, our product, Cloudly, we actually have a role that's assigned to an agent running in your cloud. We don't have access to that agent. It only runs in your cloud. You have complete control over it. And then as projects build, we post a YAML file of what we need to do. And the agent decides when it wants to pick that up. And when it picks it up, it then executes it in your environment. And the wall between the two systems, the SaaS and the deployment, are completely separate from one another. As a matter of fact, the part running in your application will actually download your source code and do all of the analysis and things it needs to do and then deploy it. So that creates a secure layer between you, the developer, and what actually goes into production. And so all the different platforms provide mechanisms for that. So hopefully that answers the question on security.
Yeah, I think so. So Ian's asking another question. Ian, I'm going to invite you on screen so you guys can have a little talk on this. If you don't want to come on screen, just deny the invite, and that's fine. I don't know if you're in your pajamas or something like that. Okay, so what Ian asks is, one challenge with templates is that as the platform provider evolves, here we go, Ian's here.
Good to see you.
So Ian, do you want to ask your question instead of me repeating it?
Sure. Yeah. Templates are great, and I've certainly created a lot of templates and encouraged others to use them. The challenge with them is that it often ends up sort of being a elaborate form of copy paste. You start with the template and then you evolve, versus some sort of almost more code reuse inheritance style, where if the platform comes up with better ways to address a problem, they can update their template, and new projects benefit from that. But how have you seen places deal with keeping existing projects on best practices?
Great question. So one of the ways that was asked of me before was lifecycle management of your template. And so as the template evolves, how do you keep those existing projects up to date? And so I don't think the platforms we looked at today have a specific solution, but what we were going to do or doing is basically basically every template you get has a version. When the versions change, we look at your projects and let you know through notifications, hey, the templates have changed on these projects. And then you can go through an automated process where check out your code, we'll make a branch, we'll use some frameworks to basically update all the templated code, which of course may make breaks and changes because you change things. That will create then a merge request, and then you can come in and both review that and fix those areas. And then when you commit that, your project then jumps to the next version of the template. And so that's actually something we've been working on a lot last little while to make that whole process seamless. But you're right, it is a problem if there isn't a good lifecycle management solution with that template. So great question.
Thanks.
Did you have any other follow-up on that or other questions you wanted to ask Ian?
No, that's good. I mean, it's sort of basically you're treating each project as a Git branch in some way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Makes a lot of sense. I like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of Linux tools that are doing a sort of similar model. When they evolve, you can kind of go through this upgrade process, and if you have to make changes because maybe you change something, you do that in a branch. So, yeah.
All right, Ian, I'm going to give you a chance to sell your presentation or our discussion next month. So I want you to just stretch and what can people, how will it transform them to attend your session next month?
Wow. Hopefully not negatively, for starters. No, I mean,
I'm your architect, right?
I'm definitely looking forward to people bringing questions. I think I've been thinking about this over the last few months, how my philosophy about architecture has definitely evolved over the past several years. A lot of it has evolved as I've sort of had time to reflect on mistakes that I've made, including ones that I didn't realize were mistakes at the time, and learning how to sort of be open to ideas from others, and also how to sort of recognize ideas that used to be good ones, but constraints or requirements have changed.
That's a tough one. I would agree with you on that statement. Oh, well, all the statements myself include, for me, but yeah, the design patterns are things that were the right solution even 5 years ago may not be the best way to move forward.
Yeah,
that's a tough one to get your head straight on how to solve that today.
I'm so excited. This is the first time we've had a teaser for our next session. It's like at the end of The Mandalorian or some other show or Game of Thrones where they show you a little preview of the next episode. That's like, oh my gosh, I can't miss that. It looks amazing. So well done on the teaser, Ian. So we will see you next month.
I'm looking forward to hopefully being there in person too. That sounds really exciting.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, but we were trying to arrange the venue, and then we're going to talk to you because I didn't even know if you were still in the Utah area.
I'm still around. I've been vaxxed and boosted, so I'm comfortable doing it.
Okay, great. And I will let everyone know, and we're hoping that would be great to have everyone back again.
Yes.
The smell of pizza and just I don't know, what do developers smell like? They smell like intelligence, right?
Sure.
Not a lot of cologne. Yeah, we'll just let the imagination go on that. Okay, all right. Okay,
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Ian. I'm going to close out your window.
Okay.
Good to see you.
So let's shift a little bit to your lessons founding a startup. Just in general, what are the surprising lessons that you learned there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would sort of categorize it into 3 things. One is that you're the champion of your idea. and that may sound obvious, like I'm starting a company, I have this idea, but to be the champion of an idea, to be able to hold true that I think this is a problem that needs to be solved. Now, obviously, you need to be able to take what people say and absorb that and figure out, is that actually, applying to what I'm trying to do? Do they understand the problem? And you don't want to be blind to people telling you that is the worst idea in the world. Why do you want to host a Git repo in a SaaS platform? Isn't GitHub and all those other places do that? So you want to be the champion of that idea, and that can be an uncomfortable thing if you're not used to, in your work environment, being that person, right? You have to talk about it all the time, and someone sees you on the street, they should be like, "Oh yeah, you're the developer platforms guy." It's uncomfortable though, right? Because you just keep having to say the same message over and over. The next one, which fits with that, is pitching. You need to always pitch. You need to always have that elevator pitch. You need to have that very concise, short, one sentence snippet, right? So that people know what you're trying to do. And it sounds easy, but if you're doing this all the time, it's hard to maintain your energy and enthusiasm for it. So it's good to do that. And for example, our product Cloudly enables on-demand secure cloud apps. And the question would be, well, then how do you do that? What do you do? What does that mean, right? It gets you kind of going on discussion. And then the third item, which I think is actually one of the most important, it's a more practical item than the ideation part, and that is legal and tax. So attorneys and accountants. You want to have an accountant that has experience with what you're doing. So you may know somebody who knows somebody who's an accountant, but if that accountant takes care of, companies that manage real estate, and you're a tech company and you're coming in and you're like, I want to get funding in Silicon Valley. I want to go to SVB Bank for my finance. That's my bank. I want to go pitch to all these places. Well, that person in accounting may not understand the kind of questions to ask you. And then likewise on the legal side, it is in a very expensive part of your business, but looking for companies like Cooley or Gunderson Detmer or Fenwick, those are some of the top name tiers, tech attorneys. Good idea to do that, because they're going to set you up with that company that helps you come to an exit, whether that exit's an IPO, it's a acquisition, or it's funding, all those different things. So you want to get people that really understand what you're doing. And surprisingly, very few accountants and attorneys really understand the space. Because I tried to shoehorn some people into, we have a great relationship, help me with this. And they just didn't have the answers, right? So it's really important to start with those things.
Great. Okay. So can you just talk about your personal learning process, what that looks like? I mean, you've crossed all these different domains over the years,
yeah,
and had to absorb a lot of information. What does that look like?
So I think I could summarize it in sort of 3 words: curiosity, exploration, and detailed note-taking. So I've got this little guy here, right? This is from the last year. So I take a lot of notes. So on the curiosity side, I would say that really digging into the problem. So finding out, for example, let's say it's DynamoDB. For that, when I was learning DynamoDB, I was very interested in what it does. I watched videos of Rick Houlihan, who was like the big champion of DynamoDB at AWS before he left. And I'd watch those videos, and I watched Alex Debris. And then I found out, hey, there's this book, the DynamoDB book by Alex Debris. So I bought that. It's a 400+ page book. I read it and implemented every example in 5 days, because we wanted to use it. I needed to understand how to use it, and I wanted to be an expert now. Right. And so I went through that whole thing. And then the whole time I'm taking notes, whether they're digital or written. And at the end of a couple of weeks, we had a really good persistent model working with DynamoDB that was just like super fast. So that's kind of how I approach everything, whether it's trying to do a startup, it's trying to learn a new technology. And DynamoDB was one of the more recent ones. So I thought that'd be a good example of how I would approach that.
Nice. Okay. So, let's abstract a little to just like general CI/CD pipelines. Everyone's got some flavor of that nowadays.
Yep.
And you've seen a lot of implementations. Like, tell us what makes a successful pipeline, and what kind of traps have you seen people fall into, common pitfalls, and how to avoid those?
Yeah, so I think the first part is to talk about the phrase CI/CD. So continuous integration, right? That's going to be the building and testing, most likely like unit tests and code-based integration tests that are in your binary or your source code. That's going to be your continuous integration. And the goal of that is to basically create an artifact that has been tested, at least at some level, right? Then when we talk about continuous delivery or CD, or we can talk about continuous deployment. So in the case of delivery, the idea of that pipeline is to do all that vetting, make sure everybody's, branches passing its changes whenever somebody commits to it and everything. On the continuous delivery, excuse me, I always have to say these slowly in my head. That means you produce something that could be deployed. Could be a container, could be a zip file, could be a binary. And so the one that I don't see as much is the continuous deployment, which takes those first two steps and actually takes that executable and gets it to production, completely automated. So what I would say are successful pipelines is ones that are much more like cattle, using a Kubernetes term, than sheep or pets, I guess is the right term. And the idea would be is that while your project is special and unique, your build pipeline probably shouldn't be that much different than anybody else's. You should have hooks like I'm going to compile, I'm going to test, and then the pipeline should really do some standard things of analysis, scanning, all those things that we've been talking about. And the companies that can focus in on creating those kind of pipelines, those kind of CI/CD pipelines are more successful. A great example is GitLab, right, where it's all container based. So you just have to create the container and describe what that container is going to do. Now, in a developer pipeline, we might create specific phases it has to go through. And that's how you can hook into things. So the companies I've seen that are most successful really embrace that kind of culture. And really, not the developer platform part, but the sort of standardization of their pipelines and getting those into production. Where I have seen more common weaknesses, I guess, would be companies that just create the binary. Right, so they do the CI and the continuous delivery, which is creating that binary. And then there's this whole manual process, taking the binary, opening tickets, doing Jira workflows, whatever your process may be. And I feel that those companies, because of that bureaucracy, tend to be more of a bureaucratic or pathological type of environment using the Western model. But they tend to be more bogged down in process and less interested in getting to the customer today. And so I think the companies that are really successful and leverage the capabilities of a pipeline want to go all the way from your writing code to production and automate everything along the way. And the companies that don't do that, I think, get something out of the CI/CD pipelines, but they're kind of missing the boat. Imagine you're going to fly from here to Europe and you had a layover in New York and you got off the plane and just left. You kind of didn't get to Europe. You didn't get your trip. You just got to partway. And so I feel like companies that don't really embrace that full process tend to get off from New York using that analogy.
So are there any old tools or practices that are, used to be good 5 years ago that you think need to be reconsidered now?
Compute deployments. So building an app that has to run all the time, 24/7, and always has to have connections to things. So a good example, Java app, maybe it's a Spring Boot app, it's connecting to a Postgres database. That means that app has to be running all the time because your app is going to be checking your Postgres connection to make sure Postgres is running. And now you have just paid for a bunch of compute time that is potentially not needed. And secondly, you've limited how your app can actually be run. So I think, in some of the new models, like when Ian was talking about sort of changing some of your ideas around design patterns or embracing slight changes, I think a lot of the more web-enabled type databases, not to sound like a broken record, but like DynamoDB, those kind of technologies are designed for you to maximize your processing time without wasting time where you're just idle, just sitting there. And for those that think you can't get the performance out of, say, serverless architectures, Amazon has a whole bunch of ways to keep that performance extremely high. We actually did a project that did 12,000 requests per second for 10 million concurrent users. And it was all done in DynamoDB and Lambdas. So you can meet that performance and have that super snappy kind of response. But I think just thinking about a traditional sort of deployment environment is probably not the best way to build your source code or your apps moving forward.
Great, great. So let's look into our crystal ball, and what do you see coming around the corner, just in the CI/CD or what's the next evolution of developer platforms? What are you excited about and you really think is going to happen?
So it's interesting because this ties into developer platforms, but I would say zero configuration web-based development. The idea that you don't need a Mac, what is it called now? The
M1
Mac
chip?
Well, not that, but I was thinking the new one they just released. The Mac Studio, right? The Ultra chip, it's like $5,000 or something for that box. The days are gone where you really need that, maybe unless you're doing video editing. And as a developer, I would really love to drop into one team's project and they're all TypeScript. And so I don't want to set all that crap up. I just like to go in and start working, right? So whether you're looking at some of what VS Code is doing with GitHub, or if you go to any VS Code project and hit the period on your keyboard, you're going to pop into VS Code running, hosted, and editing the code that's in that Git repo. Or you're looking at something like a Docker developer environment where your entire tool chain is built into that container. And when you want to do something, the container deploys, you fire up VS Code and it does a remote connection to the container. It's just like you're running on your desktop. Amazon has Cloud9, which is another web-based IDE. It's as good as IntelliJ. So
really, that's a bold statement.
Maybe it's not exactly as good, but it's pretty close. And certainly VS Code, for those, I think another change is a lightweight IDE like VS Code has really got a lot of people's attention, a lot of mind share at the moment. And it's got lots of great plugins and things that work. Having that hosted on a SaaS platform like GitHub means I can just work on my code. I was trying to remember the name of it, but there's a company that started about 2 years ago, and their whole premise was everything that you do at your company is hosted through a Git repo, and all your development, your communication, everything is done on your browser, completely owned, managed, and controlled by your company. So think about that. You don't have to worry about the developer's workstation or the security profiles of what your developer is doing, especially in a remote world. And the name is code something. It's just not coming to me. But that is the future. I mean, imagine you come to a team, get a great chair, nice desk, and that's the expense that the company's putting out. You get a monitor, right? And boom, you connect, obviously a smart monitor, and you connect to your web-based environment. And it's like you're building something locally. You pop open a terminal, do all the things you want. It's just all there. So I think that is going to be one of the big changes. And I actually already said the other one I was thinking, which is compute-based infrastructure, moving away from that.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, it's my employer. It's such a pain to get everything running locally, and everyone has unique problems. And that's a wonderful vision.
So I think that the new mantra is going to be the minute you join a team, obviously there's some mental cognitive pieces where you need to understand the team and the space. But after all that's said and done, you should hit the ground running at 60 miles an hour the minute you want to start writing code. And everything that you do today, everybody listening today, think about tomorrow morning, everything you got to do, right? All of that. Imagine that's all gone. I just write code. And I get to enjoy the part that brings me the most joy. And it gets to my environment, meets my customers where they're at. So that's kind of where I think things are going.
And so I could see an evolution of that where you could hit a button and just say, build this and give me a version of it that I can see how it works. Because that's the benefit of running it locally, is you could deploy it locally and run it. Do you see that as part of the the package?
Oh yeah, that's all part of that. Especially when you look at the Docker developer environments, it's running in that container. It's imagine a headless compute instance, like a rack server that you'd go to, right? You SSH in, you do all your stuff. And back in the old days, we'd call that X11 to give you the monitor. Well, now you can do all that with Docker and VS Code. And so it's running in Docker. You get a prompt at the command line. You can do all your commands, build, test, whatever you want. And it's all ported back to your laptop, to your environment, but it's contained in that Docker container. Yeah, there's a
Exciting.
lot of stuff happening in that space.
That's exciting. Yeah, I'm sure the developer productivity will increase, well beyond the expense of some of these platforms, in the next couple of years.
Yep.
So would you predict like in 5 years, everyone or most people will be working in these environments?
I think the people that can will be. I think if you look at all the strategic acquisitions Microsoft has been making over the last 2 years, many years ago, they bought GitHub and then they bought NPM. They created TypeScript. They have VS Code running in your browser. They have another, I forget what it's called, but where you start to type and it'll suggest an entire implementation of a problem based on, what you're trying to do. If you look at that, they're moving towards the future of what will be the common developer environment.
Wow, that's a bold vision. I'm excited about it.
And I would say in the next 5 years, it all changes.
Okay.
That will become what you're doing in 5 years.
That's great. No longer having to worry about lugging around a huge laptop that has all the code on it. You have to be worried about all the time.
Yeah, right. So you get rid of those. My laptop was left at the coffee shop, and the entire database of my company is now on the internet.
Right. And
how that ever happened in the first place is beyond me. But anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So we're out of time. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think the audience would just benefit from? Just a completely open-ended question there.
I guess the question I would pose back to the audience is the best way to learn and to move forward is to be open with what you know, to be able to jump in and help your coworkers, to ask your coworkers for help. And the more open and helping that you are with those around you, the more you're going to learn and the more rewarding your job is going to feel. So instead of holding what you know close, share that and help your teammates to be better. And in reverse, the more you do that, that may start to encourage your teammates to do the same thing. And that's just a win-win situation. Oh, I think you're on mute. Or I'm on
Yes,
mute.
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was on mute there. Okay, so that is our time. So I've got the winners of our prizes. So we've got 2 JetBrains licenses and 1 Agile Learner. So you don't need to do anything. I will email you with these shortly. So our first JetBrains license goes to Satya Tadanata. So I will send that to you. And the second JetBrains license goes to a mysterious person called Asterisk. It must be their hacker name or something cool like that. But whoever you are, Asterisk, you get a JetBrains license. And then the winner of the Agile Learner subscription is Josh, whose email includes the words road rage. So road rage Josh, look out for him on the freeway, but he will soon be learning from Venkat. And that is it for this evening. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. And then for everyone, next month, once again, is our architecture discussion with Ian. It's going to be an amazing discussion, and hopefully it'll be in person here in Salt Lake, but it will be broadcast. So here on Crowdcast the same way, so everyone can enjoy it and ask questions and interact. So with that, bid everyone good night. So thank you for attending. Really appreciate it. And this presentation will be available online. And Chris, could you post the link to your slides in the chat here so people could have those with all the links?
Yes, I need to go take a look at what my notes are. So can I give that to you to hand out or add to this after?
Yes. Well, we can post them on Meetup in the comments there. Why don't we do that? And then, we can just post a link there. And I don't think we can post links here after we stop recording. So it'll just be on Meetup, and you guys can get the slides and the other relevant